Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Youth Ledger. Today's guest is Mira Thevan, a global development leader whose work spans some of the world's most influential organizations. She's currently at the World Bank, where she's focused on technology driven solutions like blockchain for aid transparency and gender equity initiatives. Mira has also led major advocacy efforts at UNICEF and Amnesty International, managing hundreds of partnerships and multi-million-dollar campaigns. Her career bridges policy, innovation, and grassroots impact. And today, we'll hear her story and insights. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Mira. How are you?
Hey, Shiven, nice to meet you. I've been good. How have you been?
I'm doing very well. It's a pleasure to finally meet you.
Same here, same here.
So, I want to start it by asking you a bit about yourself, maybe introduce yourself first, and then we can get into the questions.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I I'm a development sector professional. I have majored in sociology in my undergrad, and then worked with disabled individuals and worked on vocational training for them. And then I worked with Amnesty International, where I primarily worked on the outreach and partnerships team, where I started out as an associate and went on to become the country manager during my tenure there. After which, I came to the US. I did my master's in international development policy at Duke, during which time I also interned with UNICEF on their education team, focusing on an education dashboard that we were launching at that time. And then after graduation, I got to the World Bank. And here I've been working primarily with two teams. One is the finance and accounting team, and the other is the gender team.
Sounds cool. So, my first question is, as you mentioned, you've worked across some of the world's most influential organizations, the World Bank, UNICEF, and Amnesty International. How did your journey in international development begin, and what drew you to the field?
Honestly, I didn't really enter this field with a grand plan. It started more subtly with like small things that didn't sit quite right with me growing up, right? As a child, I'd often, played with kids from the neighborhood, right, after school, or even the house helps children. And my parents never made it feel like it was something unusual. But I remember one of our neighbors, like one of my friends' parents, was quietly disapproving of it. And I didn't fully understand it at that time, but I remember noticing how I felt weird about them expressing or like drawing a line around that. And yeah, years later, I think that early exposure to inequality kind of stuck with me, not in like a theoretical way, but as something that I knew that I felt was not okay. And so when I started college in a business program, I knew pretty quickly it wasn't for me. Not that I hated business, but I wanted my work to mean something more. And after a lot of back and forth with my parents, I switched to sociology, and that opened everything up for me, really. The real turning point came during a summer internship with an organization called Boomi, where we would run after school programs for kids in government schools, many of whom were falling behind not because they weren't capable, but mostly because the system hadn't helped them catch up yet. And for the first time, I saw how people were solving problems with intent, community effort, and zero policy mandate. That idea that you don't need to wait for permission to make change was powerful for me. After that, I kept seeking out work that combined people centered problem solving essentially with some kind of systemic thinking, right? And so the summer after that, I had traveled to the Philippines and worked there with a women's self help group. We were helping them turn skills into income, basically helping them set up like either a small nonprofit through which they were earning, or even like a female owned business through which that they can get sustainable income. After that, after graduating from undergrad, I'd worked on vocational training for youth with disabilities. And after a while, I realized that this is good work, but my work is essentially only reaching a handful of people. And if I wanted to change systems and not just symptoms, I needed to move into policy. And that's kind of how I found myself working in the developing sector, right? Not just as a practitioner on the ground, but as someone who wanted to understand how large institutions could function better. And that exactly is what still motivates me to continue working in this field and trying to kind of close the gap between intention and impact and making sure that systems I guess, are working to make sure that they serve the people that they often overlook. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds great. Makes sense how your journey evolved from just your experiences to an overall making an impact, as you said, at the World Bank. So, my next question is, how did your work with the Africa Gender Innovation Lab shape your thinking about measuring socio-economic well-being for women, and what do you see as the most urgent gaps in gender data right now, particularly in developing countries?
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. Working with the Africa Gender Innovation Lab was like a crash course in just trying to teach me how complex it is to measure progress for women, not just anecdotally, right? One thing that really struck me is I want to say how much of what matters in a woman's life isn't easily captured by traditional indicators. And what I mean by that is, see, we can measure income, you can measure employment, even education, right? But how do you quantify things like voice, autonomy, or agency, right? To make the ability to make meaningful choices. And a lot of the work I supported focused on exactly that, basically developing tools that were trying to measure the hard to measure areas. For example, I primarily worked with two tools, right? One was called Esteem and the other was called Magnet, that basically looked at women's decision making power, goal setting ability, and basically essentially asking what does agency look like in a woman's everyday life and how can that be built into frameworks. And that's where the data gaps become glaring. Because in many developing countries, we still don't have enough gender disaggregated data, especially when it comes to intra household dynamics. Why? Because most surveys treat the household as a single unit. And so you miss a lot of the power or resources or how resources are distributed within the family. And we also don't collect enough data longitudinally to track how women's lives change over the course of their lives, right? In the context of where they are, not just economically, but emotionally and the social function that they serve as well. And the other important thing is context, right? Because a lot of the studies that do exist end up being they're called weird studies, right? Western, educated. And so they're always in that setting and they're not measured in the context that they're supposed to be measured. And so any intervention that we develop is then not being informed by data collected from that area. And so I would say, like, my biggest takeaway from working with Jill, the Gender Innovation Lab, is that if we don't measure the right things, then we risk designing policies that look great on paper but miss the point entirely. Yeah.
So, how can this data help maybe affect those policies specifically and maybe empower women to build businesses and make more decisions? And how does this contribute to developing economies in general?
Yeah, for sure, right? But if you look at a country like Africa, if a lot of the women aren't participating in, let's say, the labor market, you want to understand why first. Is it because of lack of education? Is it because they don't have the autonomy to make that decision, even if they do have the education? Or are they lacking ability? So that's where, let's say, you're measuring a woman's decision making ability. You're trying to see if this woman, if is entrusted with a business, would be able to run it, would be able to make the right decisions. So you're measuring for all of that. The reason why you want to measure for all of that is then your interventions, basically the let's say you're putting together a training, right? You want to train them on the right things, because what if we're already training them on something that they inherently possess, then you're not really adding to it, right? And so you want to know what is lacking, or what is the context in which, if there's something is already present, if it's not lacking, then why is it not being practiced? So you want to understand that. And once you understand that, only then can you come up with an intervention that addresses exactly what the problem is, instead of just putting like a a paste on something and thinking that it would fix it, but essentially over long term you won't see the results, right? And why do the results matter? I guess it goes without saying, right? Because if half of the world are women, and if they are not an active part of the labor market, you can imagine how skewed things are. If you want economic development, you want all of the people in your country to be a part of the labor force, right? And contributing to it effectually, and not just dropping off when they have children or when they're getting married. And so you want to account for all of those things, try and solve them, if not solve them, or at least create, I guess, opportunities in which you could use that labor in another way, right? And you want women to make those decisions that as to whether they want to participate or not, and not because they have to do it because of a certain social norm that exists. So that's why this data matters.
Makes sense. I think the first time I was thinking about it, my question was, why would you have 50% of your labor force working when you can have 100% of it
Yeah,
working?
literally. Yeah,
You're just missing out on half the productivity and half the money.
yeah, yeah. Exactly, right?
Speaking of money, that's a good transition. You were part of the project management team for finance related initiatives with the accounting and finance unit at the World Bank. What are some of the financial systems, tools, or reforms you've seen that are quietly revolutionizing how development gets done behind the scenes?
Oh, this is great. It's actually one of the most exciting things that I've been working on at the moment. So it's an initiative, or rather, it's a platform called Funds Chain. And it's basically the World Bank's first blockchain based system for tracking how funds move through development projects. So here's the thing, when people think of development, they picture essentially programs that they're thinking of people receiving vaccines, schools getting built, rural communities getting trained. But behind all that is a massive web of financing that needs to be transparent, traceable, and fast, right? And traditionally, it has been a challenge to track money once it leaves headquarters. While there are checks and balances in place, and there is a way to measure it now, a grant, once it gets dispersed, it might pass through several ministries, agencies, and contractors before it reaches like the final recipient that it's meant to serve. And you can already imagine, right? If that's the case, then that kind of gives way to delays, inefficiencies, and in some rare cases, even misuse can creep in, right? So FundsChain essentially changes that. It uses blockchain to create a tamper-proof ledger of every financial transaction down to the contract level. So you can see how funds flow across countries, agencies, implementing partners, all of it in real time. Think of it like GPS, but for development finance, right? You're able to really track it essentially on a particular platform at any given point in time. And as a part of the project management team, I basically help track the platform's expansion, ensure that the operations, stakeholder management, and data systems are moving in sync. And I would say what I find truly revolutionary isn't just the tech, it's how these kind of systems start to shift behavior. When people know that there's visibility, there's more accountability, there's more, I would say, pressure to spend money wisely, spend the finance wisely, and also to communicate clearly, right? You're taking that extra measure to make sure that that happens. And it's still early days. We've only piloted in about 10 countries, but we're quickly scaling up. And to me, this is where the real innovation happens, right? Not in like a really flashy project, but building systems that quietly make the whole engine run better in the long term. Yeah.
So since it's blockchain based, does it still use maybe USD or the local currency, or is it crypto based? I'm just wondering. These cryptos becoming a big
Not
thing.
Yeah, no, for sure, but not yet. Right now, we're still using, the currency in which the commitment was made to the country.
Okay.
But we're trying to attach blockchain to the kind of, let's say, a document that you have to upload saying that you've received it, or like a contractor uploading like receipts to say, okay, this is what it was spent on. So that's where blockchain is being introduced at this point in time. But there's no way of knowing how
Okay.
this will evolve in the next couple of years, and also it's something that we're working on that I cannot talk about right away.
Okay. Alright, sounds good. Maybe I'll hear about it in the news. Okay.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
My next question is, at UNICEF, you helped launch a global accountability dashboard for gender equity and education. Could you please expand a bit more on that? What goes into building something like that, and how can students get involved with these kinds of efforts, maybe at UNICEF or similar organizations?
For sure. So the dashboard that we launched, it wasn't just like a data tool, it was basically like a response to a global movement. So during like a transformative education summit in 2022, a lot of countries had made big commitments to advance gender equality through education. But as we all know, these commitments sometimes without accountability essentially doesn't mean much, right? So the dashboard was built essentially to track the promises that were made during this summit, to see if all of the countries are making progress on them, but also to create an environment in which there's essentially a little bit of peer pressure, because if country A, let's say, sees that country B, C, and D are implementing gender responsive financing or progressive legislation, it then pushes them also to go ahead and do this. So it's kind of creating accountability, yes, for the country with the organization, but also within themselves. And so that's kind of why this dashboard was put together. And it was a joint effort, in fact, by UNICEF, UNESCO, and the Population Council. And in terms of what students and early career professionals, I guess, can do to get involved, really is it can be by the skills that you offer, right? So these kind of efforts, they need a lot of things. Like they'll need research, they'll need data cleaning, they'll need visualization, writing, advocacy. So you don't always have to be a policy maker in order to be able to be a part of a team like this. Like, I'm an example for a person like that. I have a whole bunch of skills, but it's not always as a policy maker, right? I've worked in advocacy, I've worked in putting together newsletters, or in trying to convert complex information into easily understandable terms. And those are all things that go a long way. So it can be as simple as just finding out who's working on this, which you can do nowadays with just maybe looking up articles or looking it up on LinkedIn and reaching out to them saying, hey, so these are the skills that I have. I have 2 months in the summer that I can do this. Please tell me how I can be useful. And a lot of the times people do get back, because you're essentially offering, in a way, not just interest, but also certain skills that you can add to the team without them having to go out and hire a person specifically for this. And it's a great way for them also to engage with young minds. So yeah, I'm sure they'll be open to work with either students or early career professionals. And I've had that happen quite a bit. And I've reached out cold like this a lot of times. I mean, it's hit or miss. It works sometimes and sometimes not, but it's good to put yourself out there, but also advocate, not just saying I'm interested in this project, but why I'm interested and what are the skills that I bring to it. That's a good place to start.
Okay, well, that's good news for me at least, and everybody else. So your time at Amnesty International is quite impressive. You managed over 500 partnerships and helped raise millions. What do you recall as your most transformative campaign or coalition you led there?
I would say the one that's most meaningful, at least the one that I can recall off the top of my head, was Amnesty India's Human Rights Education Program, where we partnered with about 130 schools across the country, not just to teach kids about rights, but to help schools kind of live those values. To say that, so everything, right, from setting up student councils to training teachers, to launching campaigns like Bully No More, which got students talking about bullying, but as a human rights issue, right, at that level. So what really stayed with me was watching students, especially from a lot of underrepresented communities, step up into leadership roles for the first time, seeing them run the school-wide campaigns, speak up in these councils, and actually influence how their schools were run. Because you get to have a say in what are the policies that you're implementing next year, what are some things that you don't condone on campus. So things like that, that is super powerful, because they're speaking from lived experience and not just something that, an organization is just suggesting that you guys implement, right? So it's a great way to kind of incorporate the voices of the people who are then living through that reality into systems that work within the schools themselves. So from a partnerships perspective, I would say it was quite a lot. I had actually primarily worked with corporate organizations in this context. What we had done was we'd worked with companies to help do like sensitization sessions with their employees. And the reason we were doing this was making sure that these employees carry this message home, so that students weren't just hearing about human rights at school, right? They were starting to hear it in everyday conversation at home as well. And that's a holistic approach, I would say, that's made for like a whole effort of feeling meaningful, not just within the school context, but you're also going home and you're hearing the same language and you're you think that your parents also care about the same things, and that makes a difference, right? So that was a way for us to approach that issue, not just from traditionally working with the schools, but also in another context. And that's why it kind of stands out to me, because you don't expect that to happen, right? You don't expect us to go to corporate organizations, talk to employees about what happens at home with their children. So yeah.
I think the corporate partners that you mentioned are Google, HP, Deloitte. Were those the workshops you hosted? Because that was my next question.
Got it. Yeah.
And I think you already got to it.
Yeah, I did, but we did a whole host of kind of sessions with them, right? So this was about human rights education. The other kind of sessions that we would have is to try to understand what the pulse is within the organization. It was a gateway for us to go back to senior management and say, see, this is what people within the organization are thinking about a certain issue. And a lot of these times, these sessions were really great because you could tell that these people really cared, right? And it wasn't just one of those check the box kind of sessions. Like I would show up and these employees would participate with a lot of curiosities. They would share personal stories and a genuine desire to engage. And these kind of sessions have covered many areas. They've covered gender, they've covered gender bias that exists. So we would play games where like there's a drawing of someone, like it's like child rearing, right? And you're automatically associating that to be a mother or a woman rather than the father involved in child rearing responsibilities. So trying to get them to realize that these biases exist and then walking back from that. And it was actually one of my favorite parts of these partnerships were doing these sessions, honestly. So yeah, while companies talk about corporate social responsibility in formal terms, the real energy comes from the people, I feel. And they were, at least in my experience, were super willing participants and not just passive attendees. Yeah.
That's good to hear. I think the more people participate in sessions like these, it definitely makes it better. I think when I was younger in schools and such, we also had sessions on those, maybe in the middle of the day. I faintly remember about be nice, don't bully people. And I think that maybe, whether I realize it or not, made quite a big impact on how I treat people and my peers. So
right. No, that's great. I'm glad it's happening across the board, and that it does make a difference, right? Because a lot of the times it's easy to be the person that's doing the session saying, yeah, I made a difference, but it's one thing to hear it from people who have actually gone through it and say that it has. Yeah.
So, a lot of young people today want to work at global institutions like the World Bank or UNICEF, myself included. Could you share what early experiences, skills, or even internships helped you get your foot in the door?
Yeah. Honestly, there was no single big break. I guess I would say it was a mix of intentional choices that added up, right? One of the first things that helped was really like looking out for internships and volunteer work that gave me exposure to the real world and what are some things that are happening on the ground. And I feel like that's really, really valuable experience, because a lot of the time you're still asked about, oh, do you have developing country experience? Have you worked on the ground there? So that means that you're someone who understands ground reality. And that goes a long way. So even before you get to an organization like the UN or the World Bank, you want to have done the work on the ground level to understand, okay, these are the problems that exist. Why a particular intervention wouldn't work, right? And I've also worked with nonprofit, not just in India, but I also went to Philippines and tried to understand the context there, right? So that, I guess, gave me kind of a solid understanding of what communities actually need and why systems fail them. Right. And I think that was something unique that I had gathered. Another big one was learning how to communicate, right? And I mentioned this earlier as well. It's being able to write or present clearly ideas or translating technical information into something others could act on, because you could be a subject matter expert and that's great, right? There's a space for them as well. But if you're able to take that information and really get it across the board to various kinds of people, and I think global institutions really value that. So you could be working on anything from policy briefs to donor pitches, and if you could connect the dots for people, then you're really adding value. Also, I would say I got comfortable doing work that wasn't always glamorous, right? It means like coordinating events. It means building stakeholders, like doing whatever is necessary to get the final thing done. Because sometimes the final thing would be to put out a policy brief or put out a product that's easily can be used for various researchers. But what's the groundwork behind that? It means that actually calling up these researchers, asking what worked, what did not work, what could we do to make this toolkit better or this framework better, right? And doing that kind of groundwork, even if you don't have data already available, and kind of having like a hands-on approach to it and saying, yeah, I'm just gonna get it done regardless. That helps, right? So yeah, I guess to sum it up, I would say start where you are, build range in terms of the skills that you offer. Either you go deep or you go wide, or you could also be what's a T-shaped specialist, right? You could be great at a bunch of things, which is what this part of the T refers to, but you have deep understanding of one particular policy area that makes you great. That's makes your skills interchangeable for various areas, but you would still have a solid understanding of one focus area that you would probably be the best fit for something that's an intersection of this and this. So looking at it that way also helps. And also treat every project like it matters, be it like a school capstone or an internship project, and not taking it lightly and really giving it your all. That makes a difference. So you're able to then talk about it with gumption, and you also build networks not just for the sake of it, but people who are willing to go the extra mile for you and vouch for you. I think that also matters. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that leads fantastically to my last question, which is for students who aim to make an impact like you have one day, what's your advice on staying authentic and building influence before we have big titles or institutions backing us? I think you talked a little about the volunteering on the small scale, but if you could expand a bit more on that, that would be amazing.
I would say, start by getting really clear on why the work matters to you, right? There's a strong why definitely helps, because that clarity is what keeps you grounded when things get messy, or if they fail, or if everything around you is burning and you're like, okay, you know what, I know why I'm doing this, so it's okay if everything else is a mess right now, right? Because there'll be times when everything's going great in your career, but there'll also be times where either you're stagnant or even you're out of a job, right, for months together, or you're in a situation that isn't too great. But if the why is strong, that will keep you sustained longer in the field that you've chosen. And the other thing is, you don't need like a big title to influence. That's another thing that I've learned. Because see, at an organization like Amnesty, I had gone from associate to country manager, but now I am back at an organization like the bank, where I'm starting out new in another country, where I am not at a senior level position at all. And that doesn't mean my influence is any lesser. And I think being able to see that and say, okay, it doesn't matter what the position is as long as I'm contributing effectively and I know that I'll get there. I think that's also important. But like I said earlier, don't underestimate the power of small platforms, because something as simple as a classroom discussion, or a group that you co-run with someone, on a student group or an internship project, and treat it like it's your dream project. And people will notice. They always do, right? And maybe not at the time that you're hoping they would notice, or at a time that it feels most meaningful, but people always notice, and they're willing to vouch for you if they really see you put in the work and be sincere. And the other really important thing is to be generous. Share credit. Say thank you. Share credit where it's due, and publicly, right? Because you can say thank you in a intimate setting with just them, but you wanna thank people who've helped you get there, or people that you've worked on certain projects with, and be generous about it and thank them publicly. That humility also goes a long way, and it builds trust. So trust is another important thing. Yeah, I know these seem like really vague kind of advice, but I think you'll understand in the long term that those things go so much longer than any big organization, big university that you can have on your profile. Because if people know that they can trust you with something, and that you will get the job done, and that you truly care about it, that's how you grow up the ladder. Because any other thing can get you in the door, can get you that interview, but if you're not sincere about it, and if you're not following through with what you promised, then there's no point getting that role, right? Because you're not going to grow. So yeah.
Okay. Well, that was all I had. Thank you so much for your responses. Do you have any questions for me that I can answer, or?
I'd love to know a little bit about you, Shivan. I know enough to have engaged with you on this, but I think this is also, I hope to share this on my profile as well. And I'd want people to know a little bit about you without having to go
Okay.
look you up. Yeah.
hmm
Yeah.
So, my name's Shiven Diwakar. I am a high school student in the United States near Dallas, Texas. I'm going to be a junior next year, which means I'll be in 11th grade. I would say my main interests lie in economics, geopolitics, and policy. I also think entrepreneurship and business is very interesting. Especially developing countries can benefit a lot, from my view, from businesses and especially small businesses. Because even here in the US, I think the number is that almost like 90 to 95% of businesses are small businesses, and that makes a lot of, and they're very important in towns. We have mom and pop shops and you build a community. So I think if that could be implemented in developing countries, especially where everyone can do it, including women and underserved communities, that would help a lot. Which is why I reached out to you, and I'm reaching out to other people who maybe could offer similar insight. And that's a bit about myself. Do you have any more specific questions?
Not really, but this has been great. Thank you so much,
Uh-huh.
Shivan. I'd loved interacting with you. I had gone through your profile a little bit and tried to understand what you're doing, and I think it's really great work, especially at your age. I think
Okay.
you're way, way beyond what I was doing back in my 11th grade. So I can't wait to see what you go out there into the world. Yeah.
All right.
Got to-
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Sure. You too.